Hi friends, this is Angelica. Thanks for joining me here on the Greetery YouTube channel. I've got a colorful set of cards to share with you today featuring the new BotaniCuts Carrot. These dies are part of the gorgeous brand new Spring Fever collection. This is what the BotaniCut Carrot looks like. There's 2 carrot dies and 3 leaf and stem dies. I've die cut several carrots and stems from watercolor paper off screen, and I've taped them back into their negatives with painter's tape. I'm going to be doing a lot of pretty messy watercoloring, so keeping them in their negatives is going to be the easiest way for me to handle the die cuts. I'm starting off by painting the stems. I'm using Magello watercolors, and I'm just dropping different colors of green paint onto the stems. I'm not really paying attention to what green colors I'm using or where I'm painting. I'm just letting my paintbrush skip over the paper and letting the paint and water do their own thing. I want the leaves to have a really organic look. When I'm comfortable with the amount of paint I've put down, I'll dry the panels with my heat tool, and then I'm going to move on to the next layer. Drying the paper in between layers is really important. Adding wet paint on top of wet paper, even if it's just a little damp, can easily make a mess and you start wasting paint. Adding wet paint onto dry painted paper, then you start seeing the buildup of colors, and you literally can see how much more vibrant they become after each layer. I'm painting on Canson XL watercolor paper, which is a great paper to paint on for this technique. It's fairly inexpensive, it has a really good weight, and considering that these leaves are kind of intricate cuts, the paper handles the layers of water and paint that I'm giving it really well. Now, the moment that I saw this die set, I instantly knew I was making rainbow carrots. My family and I, we live in the Pacific Northwest and we're surrounded by farms. When the spring produce starts becoming available, farmers markets start popping up everywhere. And by summer, there's literally a farmers market to visit every day of the week. I also worked in the restaurant industry for many years, and one of the most exciting times of the year for a restaurant is the spring menu change. The heavy winter dishes get put away, and all of the fresh produce that is now becoming available takes center stage on the menu. The last chef that I worked for had a great relationship with local farmers, and they would hand deliver their produce to him. I would be setting up the restaurant for a dinner service, and they would come knocking on the door to be let in, holding boxes of fresh fruit and vegetables. And of course, the most beautiful, robust rainbow carrots would be in those boxes. It was so awesome to see produce coming straight from a local farm in the afternoon and then be served later that night for dinner. So, Chef's Spring Menu was a huge inspiration for this project. Getting back to the stems, I did start to really focus in on certain colors towards the end of painting them. Hunter's green, olive green, Van Dyke green, and greenish yellow were the paints that I was using the most. And yes, I know it looked like a huge mess, but as you can see, once I start popping them out, they look completely different. The paper is pretty easy to bend back and forth, so that's how I'm getting the stems loose off the tape. I'm being pretty careful when removing them so I don't rip the back of the paper, especially with the more intricate parts. The paper is a strong weight, as I mentioned before, but it is still a bit weak from all of the water and paint that I just added to it. So now I'm going to get them all out and we're going to move on to the carrots. I've already added the first 2 layers of color to each carrot. The first layer was a light wash, and then the second layer was the same. I just didn't go all the way to the right edge so I can start building my shadows. I used lemon yellow on the orange carrot, permanent red on the red carrot, and quinacridone permanent rose on the purple carrot. I moved on to more pigmented colors for the third layer, starting with permanent yellow deep for the orange carrot, and then for the red and purple carrots I used the same colors. I just didn't use as much water, so I was bringing a lot more pigment to the paper. You notice that I'm only adding color to the left side, and I'm only painting towards the middle of the carrot. I'm wetting the right side of the carrot with water, and then I'm bringing that water to the pigment I just added so that pigment can naturally move on its own towards the right side. If too much paint starts moving towards the right side, I'll quickly rinse my brush off and then dab it on a cloth that sits right next to me. And I'll start picking up pigment by pushing my brush off the right side of the carrot towards the middle and then lifting the paint off the paper. I'll dab my brush off on the cloth and I'll keep lifting paint off until I'm happy with the color. Let's talk about paper really quick. I am now using Arch's cold press watercolor paper. I normally don't use this watercolor paper for watercoloring die cuts because it is a bit expensive. But for what I wanted to do with these carrots, I needed a strong paper, and I needed a paper that would blend my colors out into a really nice gradient effect. Arch's watercolor paper spreads pigment out so beautifully and in a completely different way than Canson XL watercolor paper does. If I touch a wet brush to Canson paper to help move pigment that's already on the paper, the reaction is almost regressive. And that's because it's not a cotton paper. The pigment needs to soak into Canson paper, whereas Arch's is 100% cotton paper and welcomes the pigment as soon as you introduce it to the paper. I didn't want any harsh edges on these carrots because of pigment being pushed aside. I just wanted a really pretty spread, so I picked Arch's. Now you can see I am starting to get really intense with my colors. I'm going to start leaving the main colors and grasping for darker ones. This is really going to help build that left side shadow. So for the orange carrot, I'm going to start using brown paints. I'm starting with burnt umber, and I'm going to add paint everywhere where I want a shadow, including under the indents for each carrot. For the red carrot, I'll start using purple pigments, mixing red violet and bright clear violet together. And I'll be doing the same for the purple carrot, mixing the red violet with bright clear violet. But I'm also going to be adding some Payne's gray to make it even darker. After making sure the paper is completely dry, I'm now going to add my last layer of color. I want a really bold left shadow, so I'm going to be so intense with this last color. I'm using a concentrated red-purple mix for the red carrot and almost just straight on Payne's gray for the purple carrot. I'm going to go back over the carrots with a brush and clean water just to clean up some of the lines, and then move on to the orange carrot, which I will be painting with a sepia and Van Dyke brown blend. Now it's time to get these carrots dried and start assembling the cards. The carrots are really easy to assemble. I stuck the stems into the top groove of each carrot, and I left a realistic amount of stems sticking out. I put a dot of glue on the back of each stem and carrot to hold the stems in place, and I just pinched the papers together for a couple seconds while the glue dried. I die cut heavyweight cardstock with the carrot dies, and now I'm just trimming them down because I'm going to glue them to the back of the painted carrots, and I want to make sure that I don't glue them crooked and there's some sort of white that's going to be sticking out. But by doing this, I'm giving the painted carrots just a little bit more support, and I'm also making sure that that stem is really secure. The background I made all the same. Here I'm doing the purple background. I wet a panel of watercolor paper with water, and I add just a light wash of matching paint. I'm going to use my heat tool to dry the paint, and I'm just going to repeat the process. Add another layer of color, and I really want that distinct two-color look, but nothing that's going to be distracting. I picked sentiments from Hoop Wreath stamp set. I love how petite the words are, and since I'm giving the card set to Chef, I wanted the sentiments to be simple yet elegant. I've assembled the cards together, and I am now adding the last carrot with thin foam squares. I am so in love with how these cards turned out. I actually made 6 cards, and I can't wait for Chef to receive them. I thought this would be a perfect gift for him since his restaurant is opening back up in a few weeks. It's always good to have a great way to reach out and build up public relationships within the community. I hope I was able to share some tips with you today and give you ideas and inspiration on using the BotaniCuts Carrots. Be sure to head over to the Greetery blog for more details on the Spring Fever collection, and I promise you there's tons of inspiration to see. Thanks again for joining me today. Take care, friends.